The envelope in my coat pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. It was just paper. A few pages folded in thirds, sealed with a metal clasp. Nothing about it was dramatic. No bright colors, no warning label. But my hands hadn't stopped shaking since I'd slipped it in there 40 minutes ago, standing in the parking lot of my stepmother's house, reading the same pages 3 times to make sure I understood what I was looking at. I understood. That's why my hands were shaking. The rehearsal dinner was already in full swing by the time I pushed through the restaurant doors. My brother's wedding was tomorrow, and tonight, 50-some people had gathered at Carmela's, a private room in the back of an Italian place in downtown Columbus that my stepmother, Lorraine, had picked because it was the kind of restaurant you chose specifically so other people would know you had money. The ceilings were high. The lighting was golden. There were fresh flowers on every table. I stood in the doorway for a second and just watched. My brother Carter was laughing at something near the bar. He looked happy in a way I hadn't seen him look in years. Head tilted back, shoulders loose. He was 31 and he deserved that laugh. He'd worked for it. He'd spent the last 5 years building his landscaping company from a 2-truck operation into something real. Something that employed 14 people and had contracts with 3 municipalities in central Ohio. He was proud of it. Dad was proud of it. Dad was proud of it. I just wasn't sure, standing there in that doorway with that envelope in my pocket, whether any of us would still be standing by the time the night was over. The woman next to Carter, his fiancée, the one he was getting married to in less than 24 hours, was named Sloane. She was tall, auburn-haired, and very, very good at making people feel like they were the most interesting person in the room for exactly 30 seconds before her attention shifted elsewhere. I had watched her do it 6 times at Christmas the year before. I counted. She'd smile, lean in slightly, ask one question, and then her eyes would drift just a fraction, just enough, and she'd be on to the next person. She was doing it now, working the room like she'd been rehearsing. Maybe she had been. My name is Nora. I'm 29. I teach high school English in a suburb north of Columbus. And for most of my life, I have been the kind of person who does not make scenes. I grew up learning to read rooms, to sense the shift in temperature before a fight, to make myself smaller when things got loud. Our household after Mom died and Dad remarried was not a violent place. Lorraine wasn't cruel in obvious ways. She was cruel in the way cold drafts are cruel. You couldn't ever point to the exact source, but you always felt it. I was 16 when Dad married her. Carter was 20. He was already halfway out the door by then, off to college, building his life. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who ate dinner at a table where I was tolerated. I was the one who learned, over and over again, that in this new version of our family, I was the footnote. But this isn't about all of that. Not exactly. This is about what I found 3 weeks ago, in a folder Lorraine left open on her laptop when she asked me to print something for her. I almost didn't look. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I had the document up on screen to print it, and the file name in the corner of the browser caught my eye. Carter Dubcher Signature, Final Dubcher V3 PDF. I didn't know what it was. I printed it, set it in the tray, and walked back to the kitchen. But the name stayed with me. Carter Dubcher Signature, Dubcher Final Dubcher V3. Why would there be 3 versions of something with Carter's name on it? Why would Lorraine be the one with it? I went back. I opened the file. It took me a while to understand what I was reading because I am an English teacher, not a lawyer. But I understood enough. It was a real estate transfer document, the kind used when property changes hands. The property in question was my father's house. Not just any house, the house my parents bought together in 1997, the one I grew up in, the one with the back porch where my mother used to drink her coffee every Sunday morning. The house was worth somewhere around $340,000. I'd seen the Zillow estimate once when I was curious. The document transferred ownership from my father to Carter. Not unusual on its own. Dad had mentioned before that he'd thought about putting the house in Carter's name at some point for estate planning purposes. What was unusual was the signature. I know my father's handwriting. I've been reading it on birthday cards and grocery lists, and little notes tucked into my lunchbox for 29 years. His D curves a certain way. His capital letters lean slightly to the left. His signature looks like a wave that crests and then trails off into a flat line. The signature on that document looked close, very close, but not close enough. I didn't say anything. Not that day. I told myself I might be wrong. I told myself I was looking for problems because I already didn't trust Lorraine. I told myself a lot of things because the alternative was something I didn't want to have to do 4 days before my brother's wedding. I called a friend of mine from college, Priya, whose older sister works in real estate law. I described what I'd seen without naming anyone. The sister said if a document like that was filed with a forged signature, it would constitute deed fraud, a felony. She said I should contact an attorney. I sat with that for 2 weeks. I started paying attention differently. I noticed how often Lorraine asked about Carter's business. I noticed the way she'd ask about his contracts, his revenue, in a tone that sounded like small talk but landed like something else. I noticed that Sloane, Carter's fiancé, was at Lorraine's house more than she was at ours. I noticed that they talked in low voices when I walked into rooms. I printed the document again. I looked up the county recorder's office website and found, to my stomach's complete despair, that the transfer had already been filed. 10 days ago. The house was technically already in Carter's name. Except Carter didn't know it. I know that because I asked him carefully if he and Dad had done anything about the house situation recently. He looked at me blankly. "What house situation?" he said. "What are you talking about?" That was 3 days before the rehearsal dinner. I talked to a real estate attorney the next morning. She confirmed everything. The signature was almost certainly forged. Based on the comparison I'd photographed, the transfer had been filed fraudulently, and if Lorraine and Sloane were planning to use the newly transferred deed, with Carter's name on it, to take out a loan or refinance, they would have a legal pathway to do so without my father ever knowing. She said she'd seen similar patterns before in cases involving family members with power of attorney or access to financial documents. They were going to use my brother's name, his credit, his signature, or some version of it to leverage a property that still belonged to my father. And they were going to do it quietly, probably shortly after the wedding, when everyone was distracted and happy and Carter's guard was completely down. I made copies of everything. I put them in an envelope. And then I went to the rehearsal dinner. I sat at my assigned table, round, near the back, nowhere near the immediate family, and I watched the evening unfold with the strange calm of someone who has already made a decision they can't unmake. Lorraine was at the head table in a dusty rose blazer. She'd had her hair blown out. She kept touching Carter's arm when she laughed. This proprietary touch, like she was marking territory. Sloane sat beside Carter in a cream-colored wrap dress. She was perfectly composed. She always was. My father was there too, at the end of the table, looking a little tired. He'd had some health issues over the winter. Nothing serious, he kept saying, but the kind of nothing serious that makes a person sign things without reading them carefully. I ordered the gnocchi and didn't eat it. When the toast started, I felt the weight in my pocket like a stone. Carter's best man went first. His college roommate, a big, loud guy named Greg, who told 3 stories, 2 of which were genuinely funny, and 1 of which made Carter turn red. Then Lorraine stood up. She had notes on her phone, which she kept glancing at. She talked about watching Carter grow into a man, about how proud she was, about how Sloane was the perfect match for him. She said the words "our family" 3 times. I thought about my mother's coffee on the back porch. I waited until Lorraine sat down. I waited until the applause faded and people started reaching for their wine glasses and the room settled into that comfortable low hum of a party that thinks it knows what it is. Then I stood up. I don't do this. I want to be clear. I am not someone who stands up in restaurants. I am someone who sends follow-up emails and underlines passages in books and stays until the end of meetings, even when everyone else has mentally left. But I stood up and I picked up my water glass and I tapped it with my fork until the people nearest me looked over and then the people beyond them looked over and then it was quiet. I have something I'd like to say, I said. I know this isn't really protocol and I'm sorry to interrupt the evening, but it involves Carter and it involves our family and I think it needs to be said tonight. Carter was looking at me with a half smile. like he thought I was about to embarrass him in an affectionate way. Sloan wasn't smiling. Neither was Lorraine. There was Lorraine. 3 weeks ago, I said, keeping my voice steady in the way I do when I'm reading something difficult to a classroom and I need the students to trust me. I came across a document on a family member's computer. I want to be careful about how I describe it, so I brought copies. I reached into my coat. The room was very quiet. This is a deed transfer filing, I said. It transfers ownership of my father's home, the home he's lived in for over 20 years, into Carter's name. It was filed with the county recorder's office 10 days ago. I've confirmed that with a real estate attorney. I paused. Carter didn't know about this filing. I asked him. Dad didn't authorize this transfer. Or if he did, he didn't sign it himself. The signature on this document doesn't match my father's handwriting. I set a stack of copies on the nearest table. They passed around the room the way programs pass through a church pew. I'm not making an accusation right now, I said. I'm telling my brother something he has a right to know before he gets married tomorrow. And I'm asking, in front of everyone here, for whoever filed this document to explain it. The silence was the kind that has texture. Carter had stood up from his chair. He wasn't laughing. He was holding one of the copies and looking at it with an expression I recognized from when we were kids, and something happened that he didn't have the framework to process yet. Lorraine said, "This is absurd." Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. "This is a private family matter that you have absolutely no business." "Whose idea was it?" Carter said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Sloan. Sloan didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. "I need to talk to you," she said to Carter. "Not here." "Whose idea was it?" he said again. Quieter this time, which was worse. My father had gotten up from his chair. He was holding a copy of the document with both hands, the way people hold things when they're trying to make sure they're really seeing what they think they're seeing. "Patricia," he said. That was Lorraine's actual first name. "Did you file this?" she said. "Charles, let me explain. Did you file this?" The room had 50-some people in it, and every single one of them was motionless. I could hear the kitchen sounds faintly through the walls. Somewhere a door swung. A glass clinked in another room. Lorraine sat back down without answering. That was its own kind of answer, too. What happened after that was not clean. I want to be honest about that. It was not the satisfying cinematic conclusion where every thread is resolved and everyone goes home knowing exactly where they stand. Carter and Sloan left together, and I don't know what they said to each other in the parking lot. My father left 20 minutes later, quietly with the documents folded in his jacket pocket. The rehearsal dinner continued in a strange, muted way for another hour. People eating and talking in low voices the way they do after a funeral, when everyone is still in the same building but something fundamental has changed. Lorraine did not speak to me again that night. I drove home alone at 11 o'clock and sat in my car in the driveway for a long time before I went inside. The wedding did not happen the next day. Carter called me at 7 in the morning. He said he needed a few days. He said he wasn't sure about anything yet. He said he'd talked to a lawyer, not mine, his own, and that there were things about the finances that had started to look different once he knew what to look for. He said at the end, "Why didn't you come to me first?" I had thought about that question for 3 weeks. I turned it over and looked at it from every angle. Why not take it to him privately? Why not let the family handle it quietly, protect the relationships, save the wedding? The answer I kept coming back to was this. Because quietly was how it was done to us in the first place. The signatures had been forged quietly. The documents had been filed quietly. Lorraine had been managing my father quietly for years, in a house where nothing was ever said directly and nothing was ever what it seemed. I had grown up in that quiet, and it had cost me more than I could fully count. If I had gone to Carter privately, with just the two of us, Lorraine and Sloan would have had the opportunity to explain, reframe, gaslight, and manage until the truth was buried again under enough smoothed-over surfaces that Carter might have chosen to believe the simpler story. With 50 people in the room, there was no simpler story. "I don't know if I made the right call," I told him. "I genuinely don't know, but I wasn't willing to let you walk into that marriage without knowing." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "That was 6 weeks ago. The legal situation is still ongoing. My father retained an attorney. The deed transfer is being contested. Lorraine has moved out, though whether that is permanent is something no one has said directly. Because we are still, apparently, a family that doesn't say things directly. Carter and Sloan are, I'm told, in couples counseling. Whether the wedding happens eventually, I don't know. I hope it does, if that's what he wants. I hope it doesn't, if she knew about this from the beginning. I have had a lot of time to think about whether what I did was right. I keep coming back to the moment just before I stood up. I was sitting at my table with my uneaten gnocchi and my heavy coat and my envelope, and I thought, if I don't say anything, I am choosing to protect the surface of something rather than the thing itself. I am choosing the party over my brother. I am choosing everyone's comfort in that room tonight over the rest of his life. I have been making that choice in small ways since I was 16 years old. Making myself smaller, reading the room, deciding that keeping the peace was my responsibility, even when I was the one the peace was being kept at the expense of. I was tired of it. I don't know if that makes what I did right. I know there are people in that room who think I was raw, that there was a better way, a kinder way, a less public way to handle it. Maybe they're not entirely wrong, but here's what I also know. My brother is 31 years old, and he almost walked into a marriage with someone who was prepared to defraud him. My father almost lost his home, the home my mother picked out, where she planted the garden that still comes up every spring, to a forged signature and a quiet filing at a county office. And they would never have known. So yes. I stood up. I tapped my glass. I said the thing that needed to be said in front of the people who needed to hear it. I would do it again. And if you've ever sat at a table where you knew the truth and said nothing because you were afraid of the cost, I think you understand exactly why. I've thought a lot about what kind of person stays quiet and what kind of person speaks. For most of my life, I was the first kind. Not because I was weak, I want to be clear about that, but because I had learned, early and thoroughly, that speaking up in my family came with a cost that I was usually the one paying. So I learned to absorb things, to notice everything and say nothing, to be the person in the room who understood exactly what was happening and chose again and again to let it pass. What I didn't understand until recently is that silence isn't neutral. It feels neutral. It feels like you're not doing anything, not choosing anything, just letting life move around you while you stay still. But silence is a choice the same way any other action is a choice. And like any choice, it has consequences. Not just for you, but for the people around you who are counting on someone to say the thing that needs to be said. Carter trusted me. Not in the way you trust someone you've explicitly asked for something. In the deeper way. The way siblings trust each other to be paying attention, to be in their corner, to see things they might miss. I almost let that trust down. I almost sat at that back table with my envelope and my cold gnocchi and talked myself into believing it wasn't my place, that it would work itself out, that maybe I was wrong. I wasn't wrong. And it wasn't going to work itself out. Lorraine and Sloan were careful and patient, and they had been building this quietly for long enough that another few weeks, another month after the wedding, after Carter's guard was down, and it would have been done, the house would have been leveraged, the money would have moved, and my brother would have spent years untangling something that should never have been tangled in the first place. There's a version of intelligence that's about knowing things, collecting information, being right, being the smartest person in the room. That kind of intelligence I've always had some of, but the harder kind, the kind that actually matters, is knowing what to do with what you know. Knowing when the cost of speaking is lower than the cost of staying silent. Knowing that protecting someone sometimes means making them uncomfortable first. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about Nora standing up in that restaurant. Not bravery exactly, more like clarity. A moment where I stopped calculating what everyone else in the room would think and started calculating what I could actually live with. The aftermath wasn't clean. It still isn't. I don't know how Carter's story ends. I don't know if my father will find steadiness again after what Lorraine did to him. I don't know if I made the right call or just the only call I could make given who I am. What I do know is this. The truth was going to come out eventually. It almost always does. The only question was whether it came out in time to matter. I made sure it did. And if you're sitting somewhere right now holding something heavy, something you know and haven't said, something that keeps you up at night because the cost of saying it feels too high, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I'm going to tell you that the cost of not saying it is usually higher. It just takes longer to arrive.